So the top middleweights are all available to fight. In fact, the only fighters in the entire top 15 that have a fight booked are Marvin Vettori, Brendan Allen, and then Paul Craig and Caio Borralho. 4 fighters out of the top 15 are fighting, which leaves a lot of possibilities for these guys to fight each other. And I'm going to specifically just talk about the top guys. So Dricus, Strickland, Adesanya, Whittaker, Cannonier, and I'll also throw in Khamzat Chimaev. As we all know, he's going to get a big fight, even though he is the number 11 ranked fighter. And we just heard that Israel Adesanya did say that the UFC came to him to offer a Dricus Du Plessis fight for UFC 300. That was a fight they were going for, but according to Adesanya, Dricus turned it down, and he believes because of the damage from the Strickland fight that happened a month ago, which no one could blame him, of course. That fight just happened, and Dricus got damaged pretty badly. It would be unwise for him to go into a fight with Adesanya 3 months later. But what do you do with the champ? Who are the possible opponents for Dricus Du Plessis? I think there's 4 possible opponents for different reasons. Number 1, you could do the rematch with Sean Strickland, which is a fight that a lot of people want to see again. This fight makes sense for a couple different reasons. Strickland did just lose to him, but the fight was super close. A lot of people do think that Strickland should have won the fight. It was very competitive and ultimately just a great fight to watch. It's another fight that they can also sell. So not only is it competitive, but it's a fight that a lot of fans want to see again and could be a main event worthy later down the road. As we know, after UFC 299 and 300, there's going to be some cards that are going to be lacking a bit of championship star quality, and Dricus vs. Strickland could be something to headline a pay-per-view event. And I think the fight will be somewhat similar, but both fighters, Dricus and Strickland, are going to progress and show better skills in their rematch, because both fighters did make a lot of mistakes in their fight, and I think both fighters are going to fix those. For an example, Dricus not overloading with the power punches and just missing by miles, and try to mix up more with the wrestling instead and shoot down straight punches and go to the body more, right? Make everything a lot more concise and tight. Whereas for Strickland, start throwing the right hand more, not just relying on the jab, and also capitalize with counter punches. The second fight that might happen for Dricus Du Plessis, I believe the guy that should be considered is Jared Cannonier. Cannonier is coming off a win against Marvin Vettori. He does technically have a win over Sean Strickland, which he can negotiate to get a title shot against Dricus. And I think the fight would be super fun, man. Imagine the power and strength of Cannonier with his ever-evolving striking style, going up against someone like Dricus Du Plessis, who's known for his strength, known for his size, and also, just like Cannonier, throws power punches more than anything in the striking. The exchanges between these two would be destructive, man. I would love to see the fight. The only thing that goes against it is that it has the least star power. It's harder to sell a Jared Cannonier fight than anything else for Dricus right now, especially with who's in the middleweight division, with Strickland and Adesanya and Khamzat, even Whittaker. Like, all these guys sell that fight with Dricus better than Cannonier does. But through a meritocracy, I think he should be number 2 behind Strickland. Some could even argue number 1. For the third placement, I would pick Israel Adesanya. I don't think he merits this, right? Strickland and Jared are the only guys in the top 5 that merit a title shot against Dricus in some way. At least they have some kind of reasoning that makes sense. As for Adesanya, the only reason they would go with him, and they might actually go with him, he might be the guy that fights Dricus next, is because they can sell that fight. They have history between each other. Adesanya is still probably the biggest star at middleweight, and that's pretty much the reason why. In the fight itself, though, Dricus cannot make any mistakes in the stand-up, because what he was throwing at Strickland will definitely get countered by Adesanya. Every one of those openings, and Adesanya will snipe him. That's the worst kind of striking approach you can have against someone like Israel Adesanya, but Dricus has the wrestling and the grappling. If he takes Adesanya to the ground, which he most likely will be able to do, Dricus has a very good ability to follow up with a double leg after his punches. He should be able to get Adesanya to the ground. It's a great ability also to get the fight to the ground at the center of the cage. So in the stand-up, I think Adesanya dominates. On the ground, I think Dricus dominates. And that would make it a fun fight to watch. It will keep fans at the edge of their seats, you know, whenever it's standing up. Is Dricus going to get caught? Or can he surprise a lot of people and just land something big on Adesanya, making him think a takedown's going to come or something, and then just cracks him with an overhand? And then if Dricus takes him to the ground, he might finish him, but could Adesanya find a way to get back up? And then for the fourth option, I would pick Khamzat Chimaev. I think he's the least deserving fighter that can fight Dricus, but we have to be honest here. He is someone that the UFC would want to fight Dricus, and he needs at least one big win in order to get that. But the big reason as to why that he might be considered for a title shot is the fact that he has star power, right? So him and Adesanya have the star power that gets him to a title shot, even though Adesanya has more merit than Khamzat does. And then you have Strickland and Cannonier, which are more riding on the merit. But the reason why I have Strickland above everybody else is because he also has a bit of star power to go into it, or an ability to sell the fight. Khamzat and Dricus would be interesting. I know a lot of people are favoring Khamzat to win that belt. He should be the more technical wrestler of the two. He is getting a little bit better with his striking, a bit more composed with his jab and straight, and Dricus still does swing very wild. Anything can really happen in the stand-up between these two guys. But the big thing that Dricus is going to have over Khamzat is the ability to go 5 rounds at a respectable pace, whereas Khamzat has slowed down in some 3-round fights. Even though the one with Usman, it looked like he did injure his hand, and that definitely impacts the fight at some level. But off of what we know, Dricus is able to go 5 rounds, throwing power punches and going for takedowns and stuff. I think he should have the better gas tank fighting Khamzat Chimaev, but it should be a good fight regardless. And then next fighter we look at Strickland. Strickland's an interesting position because he is coming off a loss against the champion, but he does have his name in the hat to fight Dricus again. But on the other hand, there are a lot of contenders that could fight him next. So my number 1 pick for Sean Strickland is obviously the Dricus fight. For the second pick, I would say a fight with Robert Whittaker. Whittaker's coming off a win over Paulo Costa. Him and Strickland are only 2 spots away from each other in the rankings. It would be a very technical striking match. The jabs between these two are going to be interesting to watch. Like, who is going to get the better of the jab? You know, and I would be willing to say that Strickland's going to get the better of Whittaker in that department, stemming off of how Costa was landing his jab, even though he's not necessarily throwing it the same way as Strickland. Strickland doesn't like step in with the jab as much as Costa does, but his jab is way harder to read, and Whittaker could definitely run into those if Strickland's using them as a counter. But I do think with the pressure he's able to put on Whittaker, he should find some openings on Whittaker's exits, because when Whittaker misses his punches, he generally is open on the exit. This is something that Yoel Romero even saw in their second fight. This still seems to be a little bit of an issue for Whittaker today, and we know Strickland has a very effective guard. He moves his head from punches pretty well, and if he blocks or deflects Whittaker's punches, there's going to be openings for Strickland to counter him, while always keeping that jab as an aggressive weapon, pushing Whittaker back the whole fight. But Whittaker's going to have a lot of the kicks he can work with. He has the takedowns he can potentially go to, even though Strickland does have pretty good takedown defense and a much better ability to get up if he gets taken to the ground. And Whittaker does not have good top control, so I don't expect Whittaker to hold down Strickland at all. But those takedowns are going to be used more for Whittaker to just like get Strickland thinking, you know, is he going to strike with him? Is he going to take him to the ground? That's more of the effectiveness of Whittaker's takedowns in this one. But that should be a very good technical fight, man. We'll love to see it. And then we got Strickland versus Cannonier, the rematch between these two, and a lot of people even back then thought that Strickland won the fight. And it just goes to show you that Strickland has a much harder challenge against power punchers, just in general, and it's the way the scoring system is. It kind of goes against him when he's fighting these power punchers. Even though sometimes they're not landing their big shots on him, or those punches are touching him and he's rolling with them, the judges are going to be seeing these power punches constantly getting thrown at Strickland and think that some of those are going to be landing on him, where they're not actually landing with much impact. But we do know that both these guys evolved since they fought each other. Cannonier is a lot busier. He's showing that he has very good cardio with power punches for 5 rounds, like he displayed against Marvin Vettori. And that could be a very big issue against someone like Strickland, because if Strickland cannot beat him at a battle of attrition, and with the amount of power punches that Cannonier will throw at him with those leg kicks, it's going to cause Strickland to be a bit of a sitting target, and eventually some of these punches are going to get through. He's going to block and evade most of them, but there are going to be some of those that are going to get through that defense that may put Strickland in a bit of trouble in that fight at some point. But that disruptive 1-2 from Strickland should be able to offset Cannonier whenever he's looking for his opening. So when you see Strickland putting up that Philly shell and checking the kicks, lifting up the knees to put pressure on Cannonier a bit, Strickland's going to be popping him with the jab, and then the openings are not going to be there like they were when he fought Marvin Vettori. Cannonier's always looking to read for openings, and the output Strickland has with that jab is going to make it very difficult for Cannonier to ever get going. And there are going to be times where he's going to be just firing out power punches, hoping they land, rather than reading for his openings like he generally does. That's the big issue for Cannonier when he fights someone like Strickland. But it should be a great fight regardless. And another fight for Strickland, I would say Khamzat. These two guys have history with each other. It is a fight that can sell very well, and arguably could even be a pay-per-view main event. With the press conferences, the weigh-ins, the interviews, it would be a very fun build-up. It's going to be a lot of training talk, a lot of sparring talk, which is kind of a unwritten rule for fighters not to talk about sparring. And I think that fight can sell very well. I really think so. I think probably like 400,000 to 500,000 pay-per-view buys, I would guess, because we know Khamzat is a pretty big deal. He has a lot of fans, and we know Strickland does as well. And it could be one of the few fights that they could headline a pay-per-view with without a champion, knowing how many champions have fought or are going to fight in the first third of this year. And the fight itself is quite worrying for Strickland, man. That wrestling style. Like, we know Dricus was not able to take down Strickland that well, and even when he did, he was not able to hold him down. Khamzat is the best wrestler in that weight class. And we know the first first 2 rounds are going to be quite difficult for Strickland because Khamzat is going to have all the power in those rounds. He's going to be fighting at a very hectic pace. And I definitely do see Strickland getting taken to the ground and probably getting his back taken as well. But will he be able to survive? That's going to be the most suspenseful thing in that fight. Can Strickland survive if he gets put in bad positions by Khamzat on the ground? Because what we do know is if he survives from there and gets into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, that's when he's going to start shining because he's going to reverse that pace onto Khamzat. As crazy as Khamzat's going to attack him in the first 2 rounds, Strickland's going to keep a constant pace on Khamzat, pumping him with jabs for 2 to 3 rounds and just making his punches miss, man. I think Khamzat's shots are going to look kind of silly at times with how much he misses against someone like Strickland, and Strickland should be able to counter him with the 1-2, which are the main punches he hits everybody with. And honestly, I don't know who would win that fight. That's what also makes it really good, man. I would say another fight for Strickland would be Adesanya, but with how dominant Strickland beat him, I honestly don't think a rematch is even that warranted. Then we go to Adesanya. Who does Adesanya fight next? So he can fight Dricus, he can fight Strickland again, but I would say his #1 fight would be Khamzat Chimaev. This is a fight that can sell very well, man. Probably the biggest fight, pay-per-view wise, in the middleweight division. You could literally headline any pay-per-view event with Adesanya versus Khamzat, and you do not need a title on the line. And there were rumors that this fight was going to happen in Saudi Arabia or something. It's a massive fight, man. I can see it drawing like 700,000 to 800,000 pay-per-view buys. And the fight itself, I mean, the press conferences would be very interesting. I think Khamzat would turn it to an 11. He'd be so animated, more exciting than ever before for the build-up of the fight. Getting an Adesanya's face during the face-off is just a huge build up, and hopefully they would do a really good promo with it. If you guys saw that Ngannou and Anthony Joshua promo, I wish the UFC starts doing stuff like that because it looks like a movie trailer. Can you imagine they did something like that for Adesanya and Khamzat? It'd be insane. And then for the fight itself, I'm not gonna lie, man, I don't like Adesanya's chances against Khamzat. I really don't. I think he's taken down, softened up by ground and pound, and submitted. He does have a chance to catch Khamzat in the feet coming in. Khamzat is one of the more hittable guys. He will walk into punches sometimes, and Adesanya is extremely precise, but more times out of 10, I think Khamzat beats him. But another fight for Adesanya would be Robert Whittaker, but that is the last pick for Adesanya, I think, because we've seen it twice. Even though they are competitive with each other, they're both middleweight legends, I just don't think the fans are too excited to see Whittaker and Adesanya fight again, compared to the other fights for these two fighters. I think it'd be another competitive fight, nothing too different from the second one. And then for Robert Whittaker, what do you do with him? So we know that he could fight Strickland, which is my #1 pick for Whittaker, and the other fight for Whittaker would be Adesanya. Another fight you could do with Whittaker is Khamzat. I believe Khamzat said recently that he would fight Whittaker, and it should be stylistically one of the tougher fights for Khamzat in this weight class. A guy who has good takedown defense, a guy who should be able to outstrike him as long as it stays in the stand-up. In a 5-rounder, it's going to favor Whittaker, and a 3-round is probably going to favor Khamzat. And who really knows how that fight is going to go down? It'd be like a good co-main to any pay-per-view event. Then we're going to Jared Cannonier. We talked about the Dricus fight. We talked about the Strickland fight. There's no way he fights Adesanya or Whittaker. He already got beat by both those guys. But there is a possibility for him to fight Khamzat Chimaev. And this is a fight that was rumored before. This is a fight that Khamzat was targeting before. It'd be a very dangerous fight for both guys, and I honestly think it's the funnest fight out of any of these. Like, in terms of entertainment, in terms of excitement, Jared Cannonier is one of the more exciting strikers in the middleweight division. Khamzat's one of the more exciting grapplers in the middleweight division. The way these two would mesh together, especially knowing that Khamzat is aggressive in the stand-up as well. He will bang it out with Jared Cannonier at times. That fight would be fireworks from beginning to end. Maybe Cannonier's gas tank wins him the fight. Maybe his ability to push the pace for 5 rounds would start to tear down Khamzat Chimaev, but Cannonier has been taken down quite a few times in his career, and there's no one he's ever fought in middleweight like Khamzat. He never fought a guy who has the wrestling Khamzat does. That is probably my favorite fight out of all of these, so I would actually pick for Jared Cannonier, the #1 fight would be with Khamzat Chimaev as well. We know Vettori is going to be fighting Brendan Allen. For Paulo Costa, I would say him versus Imavov. I think it's a perfect fight to have. Both those two guys should fight each other. And then finally for Khamzat Chimaev, he has the most options. He can fight Dricus, even though I don't think it's warranted at all. He could fight Strickland. He could fight Adesanya. He can fight Whittaker. He can fight Cannonier. He can even fight the winner of Vettori and Allen. He could fight even the winner of Costa and Imavov if they do that. Or he could just fight Costa now. Khamzat is in the best place, and it's also because he is ranked #11. And thankfully for him, most of the other fighters ahead do not have any opponents, so he has a lot of opportunities here to negotiate for an opponent. And those are the fights I would like to see. Any of these fights can really happen for each other if we have this in some kind of chronological order. The first fight for Dricus can be Strickland. The first fight for Adesanya can be Whittaker, I guess. Because the only issue with this is, if you do Adesanya versus Khamzat, for an example, then what do you do with Cannonier and what do you do with Whittaker? If they do Adesanya versus Dricus, then I guess you could do Cannonier versus Strickland and Whittaker versus Khamzat. That seems to be the most likely scenario the UFC is going to make here. But leave in the comments below, what do you guys think? How would you match up the top middleweights right now? Which fights would you like to see the most? And I'll see you guys in the next video, which is probably going to be the podcast.